Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Harris. I'm the Programme Manager for Living Levels and also the Dragonfly Recorder for Herefordshire. And I'm speaking today about the Living Levels project, which is based on the Gwent Levels in South Wales, which is right on your doorstep here. So as Lauren said, this is a big partnership project. It's been running since 2018 now, although the partnership was formed back in 2014. And it's a big partnership including all these organisations. It's hosted by RSPB Cymru, RSPB Wales, includes NRW, the three local authorities that cover the Gwent Levels, Cardiff City Council, Newport City Council, and Monmouthshire County Council, and also Gwent Wildlife Trust, and all the organisations you can see up there as well. So this partnership came together back in 2014, so we've been going for about 10 years now. And it came together really because there was a sense that this landscape, this unique landscape within Wales, was really threatened. As you can appreciate, it sits on the doorstep of these huge conurbations, Cardiff and Newport in particular, and these growing towns like Caldicot. And there's a real sense that this landscape was starting to disappear. And hopefully, as you'll see as the talk goes on, this is really quite an extraordinary landscape. And there's really nowhere quite like it in Wales. And it has some amazing biodiversity, as well as an incredible history as well. And the two things are, of course, inextricably linked. So this is the area we cover. Chepstow up at the top here, and the River Wye, and all this flat alluvial plain that runs down into Cardiff here. This is Gwent Levels, divided by Newport here, and the River Usk. And it covers around about 140 square kilometres. And it has this incredible intertidal zone as well, because it's obviously linked closely with this Severn estuary. It is quite an amazing area. And you can see from that huge pressures on this landscape, from housing developments, from new roads. We had the whole M4 relief road that was planned to go through the northern part of the Levels. And latterly, we've had an enormous amount of pressure from solar farm developments. And there are currently 6 solar farms in the pipeline for the Gwent Levels, covering around about 860 hectares of land. So a huge percentage of the Levels potentially disappearing under solar farms. And while, of course, we need these solar farms, they are predominantly based on SSIs, which is, of course, far from ideal. And in fact, around about 30% of the Caldicot Levels, which is this area here, that runs between Newport and Chepstow, is planned to go under solar developments, which is something we're not too thrilled about. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'm going to run through about 14,000 years of history in the next few minutes. It'll be very, very edited, so don't worry too much. The estuary itself is a relatively recent feature, and it's developed over the last sort of 12, 14,000 years, following the end of the last sort of glacial maximum, when the ice sheet came down almost as far as Cardiff, stopping just north of where the estuary is now. And the estuary at that time was dry land. It stretched right out into the Celtic Sea, and the shore was about 120 kilometres away. Gradually over time, as that landscape warmed up and the ice retreated, sea level started to rise, and this dry valley develops into this wonderful oak woodland. And over time, that oak woodland is drained by the rising waters of the estuary, until eventually around about sort of 6,000 BC, we get to where it is now, roughly where it is now. And during that time, as the estuary forms, it forms these vast wetlands fringing the estuary. The Gwent Levels on this side, and obviously the Somerset Levels on the other side. And this is an incredible landscape, really, really hostile landscape, very wet. Obviously high rainfall in this part of Wales, so lots of fresh water coming onto the Levels, but also obviously being flooded by the Severn estuary as well. But even during the sort of Mesolithic period, around about sort of 5,000, 6,000 BC, we're getting humans coming down to hunt and fish along this incredibly productive coastline. And places like Goldcliff, People were coming down there during the summer months to hunt and fish along the coast. And we know they were there because there's lots of archaeological evidence. And Goldcliff is really one of the fulcrums around which the history of the levels rotates. This is a still from a series of landscape reconstruction animations we produced in the first part of the project. And it shows a Mesolithic encampment on the banks of the Severn at Goldcliff. And if you stand on the seawall now at Goldcliff and you look out across that vast expanse of water, it's really hard to sort of imagine what that landscape would have looked like. It's obviously totally transformed now. Both the seascape has changed, but also the inland has changed now as well. But you can still find lots of evidence to that landscape there. If you do sort of wander out from the seawall at low tide, you can come across lots of evidence. This is plants preserved in the mud, the roots of some of the marshland vegetation that developed there. And this is around about 7,000 years old, almost perfectly preserved in the mud. And even things like animal prints as well. These are crane prints. You can see them here, look. You can see the toes of the crane. And more bird prints over there as well. And again, these are around about sort of 6,000 to 7,000 years old, preserved in the mud. Quite incredible preservation. And lots of evidence of the humans that lived here as well. This is a Mesolithic fish trap, or the remains of it. And again, the wood is really perfectly preserved in the mud. And you can see all the tool marks on the top of the bits of boulder. Evidence of the humans as well in terms of their footprints. And this is one of the most incredible things. This always gives it a little sort of chill when I talk about this. That sort of sense that these ephemeral things like footprints have survived in the estuary mud for around about 7,000 years. And you can see here this really well preserved, and that's the heel at the back there. Bell from Reading University has been investigating these footprints. He's been able to track them back across the marsh as it was then, and find the campsites where people were visiting and living for the summer months at this on this island as it was then in the marshes. So skipping forward now into the Iron Age, and again we know people were down here and they were bringing their animals down again during the sort of summer months, the dry summer months, and they were feeding on the salt marsh. And this is again a reconstruction of what one of these Iron Age buildings would have looked like. And these have been found in the intertidal zone all along the Gwent Levels. And again, occasionally where these buildings have been found, you can even find the preserved hoof prints of the animals that they were bringing down here. But the inland part of the levels at this time was incredibly hostile. Very, very wet, very boggy, lots of sort of open water, wet woodland, and marshland. Skipping forward again to the Roman period, the 1st century AD, the Romans arrive and they recognize the value of this coastal plain. And they're the first ones to really systematically start to try and control this sort of wild landscape down here. This is a reconstruction of the Roman fortress at Caerleon, one of only 3 legionary bases in the whole country. And the Romans were the first to start draining these coastal marshes for grazing for their horses and for their cattle. And we know the Romans were down there because of this extraordinary find that was appeared at the falling out of the seawall down near Goldcliff. And this is called the Goldcliff Stone, and it's a centurial stone. And it records a piece of work by the first cohort of the 2nd Augustan Legion. And you can even read the name of the centurion there, Sertorius Maximus. And they were constructing 33.5 paces of something. Unfortunately, the end of the inscription there has been lost. So we don't know quite what they were doing, whether they were digging a ditch, building a road, whatever they were doing, but we know they were working down there. And we may even have bits of relic Roman landscape. This is at Peterstone, just to the east of Cardiff. You can see Cardiff at the top there. This is the village of Peterstone here. And the landscape here is quite different from anywhere else on the levels. These long, thin fields. and various historians and archaeologists are positive that this might be a relic Roman landscape. When the Romans departed, it's thought that any sea defences that they constructed were abandoned, and we now know that the Roman landscape lies at roughly about 1.5 meters down under various layers of alluvium. So we think it's just abandoned, perhaps reverting to earlier sort of forms of just using the coastal strip. So it's not until the arrival of the Normans in the 11th century and the foundation of the priory at Goldcliff, 1113, by Robert de Chandos, who was the son of Robert de Chandos, who fought with William at Hastings. And he gifts land to the priory along the coast there, and it's the monks that really start to drain this coastal marsh and create the farmland that we know today. They're the ones that build the first sections of seawall and construct this amazing system of reeds and ditches that drains the whole landscape. Into the Tudor period, and Henry VIII creates this Act of Sewers in 1531. And this recognises the value of these liminal sort of coastal plains, these coastal grasslands, and how important it is to manage them. And he sets up commissioners and courts of sewers that then are responsible for managing this landscape and making sure that the private owners that own the various plots of land across the landscape manage them in a sort of a systematic and consistent way. In 1830, the Commission of Sewers commissioned this incredible series of maps, and these are now stored at Gwent Archives, and these record all of the owners on the levels, and these cover all the parishes on the levels, both sides. There's 2 books, the Gwent Lube book and the Caldecott book, and this is an amazing historical record. This shows the levels at a snapshot in time, recording all the commons and all these strips of land. A really amazing document to have still. You can see here all the different colours represent all the different owners. This is the village of Redwick in the middle here. You can see some of the commons here still on there. And it's incredible if you actually overlay these maps on top of modern OS maps or aerial photographs. There is an incredible degree of consistency between the two. And it's a real testament to the survey skills of the people that did this, that you can do that. And if you look on our website, we've got one of those little sliders where you can see the aerial photograph and this map side by side, and you can slide it backwards and forwards and see what the degree of consistency between the two. So this is what the landscape looks like today. It's incredibly flat. It's about 7.5 meters at the coast, and it dips down as you come inland to about 5.5 meters on average. And what you're looking at here is very much an unplanned medieval landscape. All these incredible sort of higgledy-piggledy shapes of fields, not much consistency there at all. Very few sort of straight lines in there. And this landscape has just developed. It's just evolved over time. You can see where this part of the landscape probably started, this sort of oval shape here, slightly higher ground. And then from that, the fields sort of reclaimed from the wild moors in sort of a very sort of haphazard pattern. And every one of these fields is bordered by a ditch. And you can just about see this sort of pattern, this grid pattern in these fields here. This is the top tier of the drainage system. These are the grips. These shallow surface drains within the fields that take the water off them and into these ditches and reens around each of the fields. This again is looking over Mega. This is Mega Marsh here. This is the Dragonfly hotspot. A wonderful sort of piece of fenland, one of the last remaining bits on the levels. Looking out across the farmland, there's Redwick at the top there, which is the seawall and the estuary over there. And this is looking to the west. And again, you can see here, this sort of rectangle here is an old medieval grange, and this actually belonged to Tintern Abbey. So there are various monastic houses that had interest on the levels. And it's really these monks that are responsible for the farmland that we see today. Here you can see the transition from an unplanned medieval landscape with all its wiggly lines to a post-medieval planned landscape. And here you can see this is polystyrene, and running alongside that is an old seawall that runs inland. And actually, this land here was open to the sea until about 1850. It was the last piece of the levels to be enclosed with a seawall. And actually, if you walk down the footpath that runs along the Rhine here, you can see the land to the west. This land here is noticeably lower than the land to the east, because this land was open to the sea so much longer, and obviously flooded and alluvium built up over time. So it's really noticeable as you walk down there. And there again, you can see the grips here. This sort of checkerboard pattern in the fields. Lots of these fields have been improved now, unfortunately, and we've lost the grips there. Some of them have under drainage now. We have little bits of arable on here. So all those grips, they drain the water off the fields and into these ditches along the sides of the fields. And this is a lovely example here. These ditches are around about sort of 1 to 2 meters wide, about 1 meter deep. This one particularly is rather nice because it's out in the open. It's not hedged on either side. Lots of light in there, lots of marginal vegetation. Absolutely sort of fantastic for all sorts of wildlife. So those smaller reens, they all feed into these bigger reens called the main rivers, and these, by often quite circuitous routes, take the water down to the seawall. Now, bear in mind that most of this system has been hand dug, and that the levels actually drops down as you go away from the seawall. So the water is all powered by gravity. So that water has to essentially go uphill to the seawall and then out into the estuary. All along these reens, you'll find these sluices called stanks, and there's a whole lexicon of words associated with the drainage on the levels. And these allow the IDD, as it is now, the Internal Drainage Division, to manage the levels of water within the system. So during the winter, the stanks can be lowered and the levels can be drained. During the summer, the stanks can be raised and the water can be penned within the system, and obviously that promotes the grass growing then. Eventually the water makes its way down to the seawall, and it exits through a gate, which is a series of tunnels underneath the seawall, with these simple flat gates on them. And during low tide, the pressure of fresh water behind pushes the gates open and allows the water to drain out. And then as the sea comes in, pressure closes the gates and stops the seawater from entering the freshwater system. So it's been in use since the Roman times. It's a really elegant and simple system. There's not much can go wrong with it, really. And then it exits through one of these pills, which are often quite ancient tidal creeks, and out into the estuary. And of course, this whole landscape would not be possible without the seawall. As I said, the average height along the coast there is about 7.5 meters AOD, but we easily get sort of 9-10 meter tides within the estuary. It's one of the highest tidal ranges in the world. So without that seawall, we'd all be wading around. And you can see there from the level of the water and the land on the other side there's a good sort of 3.5 meters of water backing up behind the seawall there. And just to show, this is back in March 2020. It was the highest tide of that year. It was a 13.5 meter tide, and it was lapping over the top of the seawall. So again, you can see what an incredibly threatened landscape this is in terms of sea level rise and global warming and all the problems that that's going to bring. The seawall has been breached on many occasions, most famously in 1607, the Great Flood, which is commemorated in lots of the churches down on the levels. But touch wood, it's rather secure now. It's been heavily engineered in sections. You can see the big stones that have been faced the seaward side, and they've got this concrete wave return wall on the top as well. But other sections you find are just simple banks, and they tend to be where the salt marsh has been retained, and the salt marsh acts as a buffer and protects the seawall. So as I said, we get this incredible intertidal zone as well, which is really important. This is what brings all the bird life into the estuary. These mud flats and salt marshes are incredibly rich in all sorts of invertebrates and incredible feeding grounds for all sorts of birds. So the landscape today is a very pastoral landscape, not to say quite intensively managed landscape as well, which of course again brings threats and problems for the landscape and for the wildlife that lives there. Mostly cattle, mostly dairy, some beef, some sheep, little bits of arable, but not much. The landscape's really too wet for that. But it's within this incredible drainage system that the real sort of interest in the levels lies. And you can see here this really well vegetated ring, arrowhead coming through there. And this is where the real biodiversity interest in the landscape lies. And there's a huge range of invertebrates associated with these rings and ditches. Again, the vast majority of this system, and it's around about 1,600 kilometres long. If you laid it end to end, it would stretch from Cardiff to Rome. But most of it is in private ownership. Only 10% of the network is actually managed actively by Natural Resources Wales. The rest of it belongs to private landowners, and that of course creates all sorts of issues with managing and maintaining this system. It's a very costly system to maintain. In previous centuries, it would have all been done by hand. Now it can be done by machine, but of course that has sort of costs associated with it. And sadly, lots of the network now, around about sort of 60% of it, is hedged on both sides. These hedges have just developed naturally over time, but of course that removes the biodiversity interest within the ditches because they become shaded and also choked with sort of woody debris and leaves over time. But where you do find these lovely open sections of reeds, we get wonderful sort of carpets of this fantastic water crow's foot, arrowhead, and things like frogbit, and a wonderful array of beetles. This is the great silver diving beetle. There's around about sort of 250 odd species that have been recorded on the levels here. But again, you know, we do have serious issues now with agricultural pollution, runoff from fields, excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides, which are causing sort of all sorts of issues now for us. But still a fantastic array of invertebrates down there. Dragonflies, of course. We have about 17 species on the levels, including this lovely chap. This is the hairy hawker, and this is a sort of local stronghold for them. And I'm delighted to say that we discovered a new one last year, hadn't been seen in 10 years, and that's the variable damselfly. We went out to two previous locations for it and discovered it there amongst all the lovely azure damselflies. Once you get your eye in there, they're really easy to pick out, but getting that first sort of look at them is really hard. Fantastic range of birds down there. We still get significant numbers of lapwings, which have declined across the country. They do come down there to nest and obviously to feed during the winter. But again, changes in agricultural practices are really hitting these birds hard. And we've been working extensively with local farmers now to try and develop more sort of nature-friendly forms of farming on the levels and hopefully to protect these birds. We did a lovely oral history project going out and interviewing some of the older residents on the levels. And you know, they talked sort of from the 1950s of fields that were black with lapwings. So much so that, you know, that the dad would send the kids out to go and collect a clutch of eggs for the breakfast and such like. I mean, you'd struggle to make an omelette with them now. And starlings. I mean, we get the most incredible displays of starlings down here, these wonderful murmurations. I remember as a kid growing up in Birmingham in the 1970s and 80s, you know, we'd regularly see these things, but they've become such a rare sight now. And it is really one of those incredible spectacles of nature that I think everybody should experience. But if you go down to Newport wetlands, particularly around this sort of time of year, you get the most wonderful displays. And we get the odd exotic down here as well. This is a spoonbill. We've had things like glossy ibis down at Goldcliff Lagoons, and even common cranes. This is Garum. He is the first crane born in Wales in over 400 years. And this was taken back in 2018. He was about a year old then. He was born in about 2017, I think. Sadly, both his parents have gone now. And unfortunately, we don't really have the correct habitat for them on this side of the levels. They were reintroduced on the Somerset levels in the Great Crane Project. And we were very lucky when this pair flew across and nested on our side. And this was the summer after I'd started with Living Levels. And it was a real privilege to see these feeding in the fields around Redwick. Water voles, one of the fastest declining mammals in the UK, reintroduced on the levels in 2012. And because of this incredible integrated network of reeds and ditches, they were able to spread all the way across the Caldicot levels, right from one side to the other now. And they're really flourishing now. Otters as well, obviously. And our own speciality, the shrill carder bee, once a very, very common bee across the country, now restricted to only a very, very few sites. And I'm glad to say the Gwent Levels is one of its strongholds now. It relies on unimproved grassland, which of course, as you all know, we've lost the majority of now. I mean, I've been quoting the statistic 97% of wildflower meadows gone for the last 30 odd years, and it's probably an awful lot more than that now. So if you visit Newport wetlands, you can often see these feeding on the peas down there. So thank you very much for listening. This is a quite extraordinary landscape. We've been working here now for the last 5 years on a lottery-funded project. We have just been successful in getting a development grant for the next phase of the project, and we'll be submitting next September for another 5-year project. And I think the potential down here for really making a difference is enormous. Not only in terms of engaging, biodiversity gains, engaging with farmers and landowners to try and improve the way that they manage the landscape, but also engaging with a significant part of the population of Wales as well. We've got about a third of the population of Wales that either live on or around the Gwent Levels. And the ability to engage with those people directly in a landscape that they can all access and all can benefit from is enormous. I think it's an arguable thing that's conservation in the UK has really concentrated on buying up these little gems of land across the country. The Wildlife Trust and the RSPB, Woodland Trust, and they've invested a huge amount of effort in buying up and trying to manage this land. But of course, the land around them it continues to decline over time. And the UK is now recognised as one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And I mean, I've worked in conservation now for the last 35 years. I've met many wonderful people over the last 3 decades and worked on many fantastic projects. But it's a sad indictment of conservation in the UK that we are so depleted. And we have to start thinking big. We have to start taking a much broader view of these things. We can't ghettoise nature. Nature doesn't want to be ghettoised. It doesn't want to stay within these tiny little nature reserves surrounded by green deserts. It needs to be able to expand. And we have to think in terms of restoring and looking after these bigger landscapes. And the Gwent Levels is a perfect example. And it's a perfect example of partnership, what can be achieved when organisations come together and work together to deliver much greater benefits than what each individual could do. So if you are interested, please visit our website at livinglevels.org.uk. Pick up a leaflet upstairs. There's some books about the Gwent Levels as well if you want to take one. There's some really nice FSC guides as well, which gives you a potted history of the levels and all the things you can see there. But thank you very much.